So welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening. This is Margaret Yeung from the Axia agency. We are a strategy consulting agency with a distributed workforce all over the world. I would love to welcome today Vicky Bradley, who will be talking with us about mindset and how it affects our marketing. Vicky is from a powerhouse background. She has worked for over 20 years with such large organizations such as the Bombay Company, Marks and Spencer, Sweeney and Co, and Holt Renfrew, one of the leading luxury shops in Canada. She has held the position of president and also vice president in charge of over 400 stores worldwide. She has been described as compassionate, strong, inspirational, a catalyst of success, and a force of nature. And Vicky's specialties on the professional side lie in retail, strategy, planning, and leadership. When I first met Vicky, I was really quite impressed with her presence. And out of all the speakers on the panel, she really came off as the most inspirational, the warmest person, the most genuine person. And I really just found that she was a really strong character. And there's no one more qualified to talk about this topic about mindset as Vicky. And she'll be sharing a little bit about Women in Leadership Empowered, of which she is the CEO, and how she helps to coach women all over the world to raise their level in leadership. So with that, ladies and gents, I would like to pass it over to Vicky, who will share with you a little bit more about mindset. And this is one of the biggest things that I have found working with leaders in both multinationals and also leaders in startups, the founders, is really the mindset that usually is not as big as I would have thought. So that's how we came to develop this webinar about the topic. With that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Vicky.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. Thanks so much. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today or tonight, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you, Margaret, for that great introduction, and for Axia Agency for inviting me, actually, to join you and to talk about mindset. So Margaret gave me a great introduction. Thank you. I feel very honored with the way that you described me, and I appreciate that. I have spent a lot of years in executive roles, and this topic is very near and dear to me. And interesting, Margaret asked me the question. She said, Vicky, have you always been this person with a really strong and really solid mindset? And it was interesting because when she asked me the question, I said yes, and then I went, well, no. So I did grow up as a young person my whole life being, very determined and knew exactly what I wanted. And I had a very fixed mindset. And about 13 years ago, things changed. I had this amazing career in the retail organizations. And all of a sudden, 13 years ago, my world changed and I got very sick. And my mindset had to completely flip. All at one time in my life, I all of a sudden developed a debilitating autoimmune disease. My husband walked out on me. I had 2 children under the age of 5, and my company was sold. So everything that I knew, everything that had, been my world, all of a sudden that reality changed. And I had the choice then to decide, do I wallow in this and, sit around and let this take over my life? Or do I actually do something about it and shift my mindset to what's the opportunity here? How do I learn from this? How do I grow from this? And so I actually, at that time, reinvented myself. And that's how I became an executive coach. I left the retail world and decided that, my passion had always been about helping others reach their full potential. So what better way to do that than through coaching? And with that, as Margaret described, I have a company called Women in Leadership Empowered, and I also have Vicky Bradley and Company, which is where I do my one-on-one coaching. But what I learned through this is what happens to us is when we struggle, it actually helps our brain to grow. And our brain is like this great muscle, and with any kind of muscle you have to exercise it, and that's really important. So we know that our neural connections form and deepen the most when we're under stressful situations, or when we're making mistakes, and when we have to do something that's very difficult. And so tonight I want to talk a few minutes about two types of mindset. Mindset is fixed, or it's growth. And when we have a fixed mindset, that's when we're really focused on what we know. And when we know, we can be successful at it. And so when you think about that, a great example might be is whether we're smart or we're not. And believing intelligence is fixed by our genes. And so when you have that fixed mindset, we tend to focus on things that we know we can do that will make us successful. And it provides a sense of security for us. And the biggest thing I can say about a fixed mindset is that it can also limit our potential. And that's kind of where I was living all those years, even though I was super successful. When we move to a growth mindset, that's about embracing the challenges with perseverance, which can change our learning outcomes. And so people that have this growth mindset, they really believe that capability and intelligence can be grown through effort, through struggles, through failure. And, when you think about that, look at Thomas Edison. He had 10,000 failures to invent the light bulb. But during that time, he actually created 1,100 new patents for his inventions along the way. So when you think of it that way, it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So mindset can actually be taught. So then you have to ask the question, why do we worry so much about failure? Well, failure is actually something that we're conditioned with because we want to play safe. We want to believe that, or sometimes we do believe that we're not enough. And those stories that we create really hold us back. So I want you guys to just take a second, and if you would put into the chat, what are some of the biggest hurdles with your mindset, or even people that are in your life? If you just take a second and think about that. Or you can write it down, something to, that we can talk about at the end. Okay. So what I see as the biggest hurdle is the belief system, because we are the ones who we limit our own thoughts. And what I mean by that is we believe we're not enough of, we're not smart enough, we're not rich enough, we're not pretty enough, enough. What, like, the stories are the same. It's enough of something. And what also can be a hurdle for our mindset is a lack of confidence. And that also comes from not being enough. Or it can also be tied to our outcomes. When we're so focused on what the outcome is, that can actually limit our growth and our expansion. It can also be cultural. So we know these things, but it's how do we overcome it? And when Margaret was talking earlier, when my mindset in marketing, when we're running our own businesses or we're in these corporate environments, it's how do you shift? How do you change from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset? How do you overcome those hurdles? And some of that, and of course I have to say this because I am a coach, but one is hiring an executive coach or a coach to work with you to help you reach your full potential. Practicing your confidence boosting tips, which we'll talk about in a minute. Reframing into a possibility. That's actually my favorite, is when you think you can't do something, really challenging to yourself to do it. Opening our minds to learn and to expand from every experience instead of being tied to what the outcome might be. That's where we get disappointed. So really opening your mind to, how do I learn from this experience? What is it teaching me? And you might be surprised, because it might be the best thing that you could ever come against. So I'll give you a couple examples of clients that I work with. I had a client the other day, and she's really focused on limiting beliefs, and she is a superstar. Like, this woman is a powerhouse. She's got an incredible business. But what happens is she gets into this mindset of comparing herself to other people. And this particular thing was around social media. She sees all these people excelling and doing great on social media. And she felt like she needed to be there, but she was so fearful that she was paralyzed. And with that fear, it prevented her from doing anything. And so when we started talking about it, she's like, well, I feel like if it's not perfect, I can't do it, because she was so tied to that. And so she didn't do anything. So we worked on getting to the root of where this was coming from. What was causing her to feel this way? What deep down was really holding her back from jumping out there on social media and sharing her message? Because she had a great message. So we reframed it to a possibility, helping her to see if she kept doing what she was doing, which was nothing, she was not going to get anywhere. So when you reframe it to a possibility and you see what the world can provide, it gave her that courage then to step out there, and it not having to be perfect. But we set a plan of action for her. We set a timeline and an accountability partner. Another client that I had, this woman, overachiever, she was VP of marketing at this wonderful company, had always had, incredible reviews from her bosses. She got a new boss, and the guy said to her, he said, I'm going to fire you. And he did. And she was devastated, because this is somebody who was confident, had been a great employee, and he let her go. And the company came back to her a couple of weeks later, and they said, we'd like to offer you this opportunity to interview for this role of VP of risk management. And she turned it down. And so she called me and she goes, the company's asked me this. And I said, okay, where is this coming from? And her confidence level had been damaged so much from this guy firing her that she believed her story that she created was that she wasn't good enough. And so we started talking about how she was the perfect candidate, because she had been the vice president of technology. She had been the vice president of sales. She had been the VP of marketing. And so her taking on risk management for the company made perfect sense, because she had all of these skills. And so we had to work with her to help her flip her mind to the fact that, hey, yes, I have done all of these things and I am good enough to do it. So it was a really nice segue to her mind shift. So I share these because if you limit your potential and say no because you're fearful or you're afraid you'll be embarrassed or you'll be foolish, you're never going to be able to reach that full potential. So it's how do you play that game of life and take those risks, have that courage to step out and do something. And so I like to play this game with my clients, and I call it the what if game changer. And I'm going to say this really slow. So every time you share, think, or say a what if statement, you have to reframe that into a positive possibility. Okay? I'm going to say it again. So every time you share, think, or say what if, you have to reframe it into a positive possibility. And so I'll give you an example of that. Let's just use tonight as an example. My story that I could have created in my mind was, oh my gosh, Margaret has asked me to come on and talk to everybody about mindset. What if I get on this call and I totally forget what I was going to say? Or what if I make a total fool of myself? And I could have been thinking that. And I could have called Margaret and said, Margaret, you know what? I don't think I can do this. Or I could step back, which is what I did. And I could say, what if I do this? What if I go on and I have this call tonight and I meet some of the most amazing people? And at the end of the call, there are so many questions we have to go over by half an hour. And I'm talking to people from all over the world, and it's the message that they needed to hear tonight to help them take that next step. So do you see how easy that was? Like I went from oh my gosh, what if I make a total fool of myself, to if I don't do it, what am I going to be missing out on? And that's really what can drive you to help you shift your mind. So bottom line is, if we don't try, we're never going to know, right? So the question I would get you to ask yourself always is the pain of staying the same more painful than the change? So taking that step, being courageous, getting out there and really going after what it is that you want to do. I'll give you another example, and I love this. So after I got really sick this last time, I had planned a trip to Italy, and this has been several years ago now. And my mother was freaking out because she was like, "Oh my God, you can't go to Europe. What if you get sick? What if you have a relapse and things are worse and blah blah blah?" And I said to her, I go, "Mom, what if I don't go and I miss the biggest opportunity of my lifetime? What if I miss the best trip that I could ever experience in my life?" And by the way, it was an amazing trip. So it's that perspective, how you shift it so that it can work for you. So those are my what if games. So I love playing that game, and my clients hear that all the time, because when they give me a reason why they can't do something, I always reframe it for them and help them see those possibilities. So, and lastly, I would say is around boosting your confidence when it comes to mind shift. So, really practicing confidence boosting tips all the time. So, one of those would be saying yes to more of what you want. And it can be little things, but it is saying yes to more of that. So, it might be writing a book, say yes to that speaking engagement, go on a date, all of those things count. And so, it is being mindful to what you want to say yes to. And it gets easier because you become more confident as you do it. Developing positive self talk. I hear us say to ourselves all the time things that we would never say to anyone else. And so, why would we say it to ourselves? Whenever you hear yourself say, "I can't," it's use that reframe. How can you? Change it into a positive, reaffirming message to yourself. I am this. I am that. So that you keep sharing with yourself what you would share with your best friend. And that also helps you to build your confidence. And then thirdly is celebrating your successes. And we forget this so often because it's easy to just go, "Oh, yeah, I did that." But sometimes it's a big deal. So it could be as simple as you've had this book laying on your desk or on your nightstand for a year about, how to be more confident, and you read it, and that's a success. Or it could be you've been avoiding this particular person for a long time because you knew you were going to have a confrontation with them, and so you take that challenge on, you meet that person, you have that conversation. That is success. And so it's really identifying those small things that then build up to big things. And those are all amazing ways to build your confidence so that your mindset, you help yourself shift into a much more affirming situation. And then lastly, I know we're going to have some questions, sort of toward the end, but one of the things that I would like to share with you, and Margaret brought up, is I do run a program called Women in Leadership Empowered. And I will share with you that program is, it's the only online community that is set up for all four aspects of leadership development. So we use coaching, we use networking, we use peer-to-peer mentoring and skills training, really to help professional women accelerate their leadership development. And it's a good way for people to connect and to, grow that network. So I'm going to leave it at that, but we have lots of time for questions. And so I would love to hear some feedback on, what are some of the hurdles that you might face with your mindset, and see if we can answer some of those for you.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Vicky. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sean to moderate the questions. If there are no questions, maybe I could start with the first one.
Sure.
Vicky, I refer to what you say about the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because so often we are so addicted to the outcome.
Yes.
So whether, it's, either if we have children, pushing our children, if we're in work, going for that next promotion, or even that, the accolades from our bosses, or if we're selling jewelry. I know we have some business owners here. When are we going to sell the stone or sell that next piece of jewelry? When can we make the next sale? So a lot of it is so much tied to the outcome of the result. How can we focus more on the process? And let's look. We are in COVID right now. This is going to be a bit of a long haul. And it's just a real practice of being mindful and in the moment right now. And rather than waiting for the next big thing, how can we learn to appreciate the process?
Yeah. So great question, Margaret, and thank you. There's a couple of things I would say to that. I mean, when we get really tied to an outcome, that's where disappointment comes in, right? And so it is being focused on that journey to the through the process of what you're going through. So it may be situations that come up that maybe that wasn't the right client for you, or maybe that situation would have put you in a bad situation and taken up times where you couldn't focus on something else. So usually when things happen, there's reasons for that. And so it's stepping back and looking at it and saying, what do I need to learn from this? Maybe it's my presentation of it. How do I articulate this better? So it's not getting so caught up on the end result, but really focusing on what you can do differently, what you can do better. There's nothing wrong with you, but it could be even the receiver who you're talking to at that time may not be ready for the message that you're providing. That doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It just simply might be timing. So you learn from that and then you apply that to the next situation. And a lot of times what I find happens, and especially with mindset, when the outcome is not what we expect or what we had desired, the initial thought process is your mind takes over and the story you create is, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough. And that's a story. And the story is not true. And so it's learning to decipher that and understanding that there's lots of circumstances that create that situation. So you don't have to be tied to the story. So I hope that makes sense. I work with a lot of clients that this actually comes up with the not enough, because when you feel rejected or you feel disappointed, your natural tendency is to go to a place of I'm not enough, whatever the enough is.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Very, very, very good. I like the part where you said, because right now we're going through such a long waiting time for COVID, and so many of us are, either waiting on money, or waiting on news from work, or waiting for a job, or waiting for like a university application. There's things that we're waiting on.
Yes.
But it's going to be a long wait, and I liked how you said reframing it into, what could I be doing right now? What could be the best use of my time?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a reason why there's a wait right now. So I really like, what's the most productive use of my time right now? I like that.
Yeah. And what are the possibilities? Like really shifting into a space of, okay, we've never had the opportunity to have a pause. And we do have a pause right now, right? I mean, we're busy, yes, and we're all acclimating to working from home and working differently and balancing, sometimes children and sometimes partners and all these different things. But it's taking that pause and really looking at what are the possibilities. Like they're limitless. There's so much available to all of us, and just taking that step and having that courage to shift your mind space from, I can't do this, to, oh my gosh, if I don't do this. Like that's a big difference when we get caught up in the fear and maybe feeling foolish or whatever, that we have this dream. And when we can shift to a place of possibility and thinking about, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret this the rest of my life. So it's having the courage to step out there and take the steps necessary. And sometimes we don't know. And during this pause, it is a beautiful time to be thinking about, what is your strategy? What is your life strategy? We do strategies for our businesses all the time. So it's how do you do that for yourself as a whole? Yes, your business is a bucket of that. Yes, your home, your family is a bucket of that. You personally are a bucket. And so it's really making sure that you're looking at all those aspects so that you see possibilities in every part of your life.
Yeah, I realize, because for us as an agency, we do marketing. I'm not a coach. We do marketing. But one of the biggest things that I've found working with, even for, working on brands for billion-dollar companies and to startup founders, and it came as a big surprise to me, is actually how small the thinking was. And of course, it's easier to see it in other people than we do in ourselves. But when I see these leaders of different brands, different companies, my vision for them is like pretty big, but they couldn't see it themselves, and that's why I wanted to organize this webinar to really hear it from an expert, from a person who does coaching professionally. Do you see that a lot in your work?
Yeah, I do. We get in our own way. There's no question. And that's why I was talking about our story, right? Because we create our own stories in our minds. And the beautiful thing about the brain is that you can retrain it. You can retrain it. And it's getting out of your own way so that you can be successful. And yes, to answer that question, Margaret, I do see it a lot. I coach around that a lot. And it comes in different packages, I would say. Sometimes it comes from our upbringing. Sometimes it can be even like the example I used with the executive who got fired. The impact that had on her was substantial. And we had to do a lot of work. And this is a person who was, she was a visionary. She's very positive. She's very confident. But this situation, this circumstance really took her backwards. So things do happen to us. And it's important to realize, though, that does not define you. Those things don't define who you are as a person. And so when you visualize what it is you want to accomplish, and I think that's part of what you're experiencing is you have this big vision, right? Because you have this multi-billion-dollar company or multi-million, whichever, and you have this vision of what they can be, and you create that, and they put the roadblocks up because they can't see it. And so it's helping them navigate and get out of their own way so that they can be successful.
I think Sean's got a couple of questions.
Okay, awesome.
Yes, we do. So, Vicky, just from a couple questions just have come in from the chat. There's Michelle's just asked if you could speak a little bit more on the combination of real life challenges and a growth mindset. So obviously, looking at how the realities of the world sort of affect that mindset aspect. Could you talk a bit more on that?
Sure. So when we're in a growth mindset, it's really about when you see any situation as an opportunity to expand and to learn. So even now that let's use COVID as an example, we're in a really interesting time in all of our lives, and it's not just us; it's the entire world. So we have two choices. We can be fixed and rigid and think, okay, we're going to sit at home and we're just going to do this. Or we can look at this and say, you know what, we have a huge opportunity here. We can reinvent ourselves as an individual. We can reinvent our world. We can change the way we've always done things and create a better world, leave a better legacy. And so what I mean by that is when we shift into a growth mindset, it's about seeing possibilities everywhere. And sometimes that's not easy because we have those stories, but when you can move past that, it's limitless. I mean, we are in an infinite situation. So many people I've been talking to lately that are seeing COVID as a time of innovation, of incubation, of, not so much the quarantine and the isolation, but really seeing it as a place and time to, think about how do you move forward? We have great technology, we have great resources. So there's a lot of things that we can do. And so when we focus on that, that helps us to grow and stretch our minds. And believe it or not, that pushes us to grow even more because our mindset shifts into that space. So you're looking for it. When you're in that fixed mindset, you can only see kind of what's right here in front of you. I hope that answers that, Michelle.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll just move on to I think our last one. Just looking at time constraints, but so Corinne's just asked, can you expand on tips or approaches to help someone see that they're in a fixed mindset, and then how to move them forward towards a growth mindset?
Oh, that's a really good one, Corinne. So think about, so you can be super successful and be in a very fixed way of thinking. And so one way is to step back and try to be an observer of yourself. Think about, how do you respond to things? When you're working, are you on autopilot? Do you just do what you always have done? Think about how people respond to you when you're contributing. Are you staying very focused on, or this is our policy, or this is our process, or this is this? When you can identify, and it's not easy, I'm not saying that it's an easy thing to do, but it is doable. It's just practicing being that observer of yourself. And when you start to see those things, it is challenging yourself. How do I reframe that? How do I look at that more as a possibility, or how can I stretch that and think differently? And so that's how you move yourself from being fixed into more of a growth mindset. And I mean, I'm going to say this, and I'm not promoting just for myself, but having a coach is a very good way, or having a really good friend who is objective and will be honest with you, so that they hold you accountable to those things, and asking those questions. Well, Corinne, what else could you do? How else might you approach that? Even if you look at things like, if you have a magic wand and you could create anything, what would you do? And that's actually one of my favorites, because when you take away the constraints, then you are free to think broadly. And that's how you shift into a growth mindset. So hopefully that was helpful. Journaling is also good. Sorry, I'm just going to expand on that. Journaling is also good, or writing down what your observations are. And when you catch that you have limited yourself and you start to expand on it, celebrate that. So when you catch yourself thinking, saying, or sharing something that is constraining, and you can reframe it into possibility and open that space up, write those things down, because the more you do it, the more you see it, the more proficient you become at it. Thanks for the question.
Mm-hmm. So, ladies and gents, the time now is almost 40 minutes past the hour. If there are any other questions, I think you can probably send them in, and maybe we could do another Q&A session, or let us know your feedback about this session. On April the 28th, we actually have a session which is about self-esteem. So some of you may be asking, what's the difference between mindset and self-esteem? And I found that with working with female entrepreneurs in particular, the issue of self-esteem, or, just being hard on yourself, or not being able to love yourself for the way you are, this came up as a big, big issue. And we have Matthew Trethewey, who's joining us on April the 28th, and he's going to share with you his own very inspiring story as well. And we're going to talk through some of the issues of self-esteem and self-love, which actually helps to fuel a positive mindset.
Yes, it does. Awesome.
Okay. And just to share, if you are interested in more business-related topics, we do have a number of more technical skills coming up. So we've got a partnership marketing webinar, how to make use of partners to help drive your business, the ABCs of Facebook marketing, ABCs of LinkedIn, corporate social responsibility and what it is and how to make the best use of it for your business, managing revenues and expenses in your work, and also embracing change and work-life balance. Many of these are related to women because we have an unusual set of circumstances different from male entrepreneurs because we're often the earners for the family and also full-time business women. So we have 2-3 jobs at the same time, and that's why we decided to create this series because we have this unique set of circumstances. So if you are interested in some of the more technical marketing business skills, we do have that coming up later on this month as well. And as usual, we will continue to update you on email, social media. I'm personally very active on LinkedIn, so please, accept my invitation if you're on LinkedIn. And Vicky is a fantastic coach. I absolutely agree with her that everybody, if you don't have a coach, get a coach right away. I've been doing coaching for myself about 10 years now. So I found it fantastically helpful. Coaches are able to help you see things which you cannot see yourself.
Yeah.
And we often need very objective advice, not just talking to friends. So definitely, if you don't have a coach, get a coach right away. And Vicky's amazing.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. And thanks for having me tonight.
So with that, ladies and gents, thank you for coming on today and give us your feedback. If there are other topics you'd love to see, this is the time to be learning and growing.
Yes.
So when COVID passes, you're going to be bulletproof mindset.
Yeah. And if anybody has, if you have other questions, feel free, you can, reach out to Margaret. She can forward them to me. Or if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to chat with you further. So, and Margaret, thank you again. Thank you and Axia for having me tonight.
Thank you, everyone. That was great. Thank you.
Have a wonderful week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.